Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of Real Talk. This is a web series, a 4-part web series where we ask questions to a guest every week around kind of topics of life and faith. We've collected your questions from social media this week, and we've got our first guest on this morning. And do you want to introduce yourself? I was going to introduce yourself for you then, but you can do it.
Okay. Hi, I'm Dave Turner. I'm the assistant minister at TCC. I used to be the youth worker, but I became irrelevant because I didn't have AirPods for Zoom meetings. So
see, that's it. That's the one. We're going to post your questions to Dave today, and you've obviously been posting them on our social media streams, so they'll come up on the screen if you want to follow, if you want to join in on future episodes. They're going to be every week, and they're going to be about a different topic every time. But today's topic is about Christian faith. So you've been posting your questions kind of about faith and being a Christian. So we're going to ask Dave those in a second. But what I thought we would do first is some of you watching might not know David. So I thought we'd do a bit of a get to know you kind of quick fire questions round. Dave, are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
The idea is I'm going to ask you these questions. There's going to be two options. You can't think about it too much, and you can't kind of elaborate. You've just got to say the first thing that pops into your head. Okay. So we've got.
I'm always tempted to just shout out a random word like that's not related to but go for it.
You should do it. It might make it better. Right.
Bananas.
So, okay, here we go. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Oh, that was so much thought. Then I could actually see your brain working.
I like both.
Books or movies?
Oh, books.
Pepsi or Coke?
Pepsi.
You're crazy. Really, Pepsi?
I like Pepsi Max.
You're crazy. Chinese or Italian?
Chinese.
I was gonna clarify the food, not the people. I just thought I'd better make sure. Half full or half empty?
Oh, I'd like to say half full, but I'm probably more half empty most of the time. As a person, no.
That's honest. Scone or scone?
Scone, mate.
Crack, love it. Dogs or cats?
Cats.
Fruit or chocolate?
Chocolate.
Obviously. Mountains or seaside?
Or seaside. I hate heights, so.
Phone call or text?
Text.
Text. Winter or summer?
Summer.
Okay, last one. Apple or Android?
Apple.
That's a big one. I think that will divide the viewers there. I think we might have some Android users just like log off now, switch off.
Yeah.
That's the get to know you round. So I'm sure everybody who's watching knows you fully now. They're the questions that they
about me.
They're the questions they wanted to know. They'll probably just log off now. They'll be like, that's all we wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
We've had our young people writing in questions all week on Instagram, and we've had some great questions. So I thought we'd obviously go through those and just hear what you have to say and discuss those kind of topics. First of all, though, just before we get into those questions, I just thought I'd ask you how it was that you became a Christian. How was it that you started kind of coming to church? What did that look like for you? If you could just share that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so I guess, my story kind of goes back to before I was born, but I'm not going to tell the whole story, so it's not that long. But my parents kind of became Christians, I think, just before I was born. And then when my mum was ill when I was born, the church really supported my parents, prayed for me and for my mum. And I was dedicated actually at TCC, the church that I now work at. I then grew up in the church, and I think like most people just kind of went through the motions. And then probably when I was like a teenager, I was always wrestling with like these two ideas of either like being all out as a Christian and just going for it, or like giving up on it all. Like there was not really like an in-between, although that's the in-between is probably what I lived the most. But I kind of always wanted to do one or the other, and I was always in two minds, and that's why I never really committed to one until I was 18, when I was baptized, and then for kind of haven't looked back since then. So yeah, that was my experience. I kind of grew up knowing it, but I think I definitely had to make a decision, a conscious one, to go, yeah, I believe in this Jesus stuff and this Jesus person, and I want to give my life to that. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
I love that. That's awesome. Well, that leads us into our kind of first question, actually, quite nicely. Someone wrote in on Instagram and they asked, how did you know whether you wanted to be a fully devoted Christian? What was it that kind of really tipped it kind of over the edge that helped you make that decision? And when did you know you were ready to be baptized?
Yeah, so well, I guess like linking into what I was just sharing, I always had those two thoughts, and I would kind of almost, for example, on a Sunday, I'd go to like church in the morning, have like good fun with my friends, have a good like time, maybe even learning about God, a good discussion or whatever. We used to always go to church in the evening as well. So I'd go to church in the evening with all the other young people. Again, like God might move in that service. I might really feel like a sense of God there. And then we used to do something called after church. So we used to go after church and all hang out. And I'd like quite often from after church, I'd walk home, like wherever it was. Me and a few friends would always walk home, and we would always like be chatting, discussing. Or if I was walking by myself, I'd always be thinking like, "Wow, like church was so good today. Like God is so good. I love God. Like why don't I just give my life to Him?" And I'd always make a decision there that I'd give my life to Him. And then on the Monday, like I'd wake up remembering that I'd made that commitment and thinking like, I can't do that. Like what I say, like when people ask me what did I do at the weekend, I've got to come up with something like that's true that I actually did, but that doesn't include church because I don't want people to know. And I think I lived with that tension, and it used to like not tear me apart, but it used to bother me a lot as like a teenager because I did enjoy like school, and I enjoyed like the mucking around and the being silly, and even like the fleeting moments when I was popular. I enjoyed like being popular, and that didn't seem to match with being a Christian, and it was always difficult to like balance them. And I think in my head I always thought, oh well, next year, like when I go into like year 10 or when I go into year 11, like it'll be better because everyone will be more mature and I'll be able to talk about God. Or I thought when I go to college, you get to year 11, you're like, oh, well, when I go to college, it's like a fresh start. I'll then like tell people that I know God, and then I'll go to college, and the only thing that's really different is you didn't wear a school uniform anymore. But if else the same, you had a bit more freedom maybe, but that was it. And the lessons were harder and all that, but actually the people were really very much different. So that was a real challenging year, my first year of college, because I thought I could maybe start being who I really was, which for me did include aspects of God and being a Christian. But I think during that year, I was really kind of exploring who I am, thinking about who I want to be. Do I really want to be a Christian? Like, it's not that fun compared to the parties and, the girls and the girlfriends and, the drink and even trying drugs and stuff like that, that you was able to do at that time. So I was really struggling with that. And then I went to Soul Survivor that year. Some of you guys might have heard of Soul Survivor. It's just ended. Not this summer, 2019, I think was the last one that some of you guys went to. And I used to go there every year. And I remember going into that thinking, this is going to be my last ever Soul Survivor. I'm not going to go again. And also thinking, like, after this, I'm not going to go to church again. Like, this is it for me. This is like my last hurrah. I'm going to have a good time. And then that's it. I'm just going to go and live my life. And I remember being in a service one time, not really engaged in it at all. So everyone was standing up, like, worshiping. And I was just sat down. And I kind of decided in my head, I thought, I've kind of been going to church since I was born. I've got to give God a chance. Because there was a part of me that just, I knew he was real, but I needed to like really know he was real, if that makes sense. So I prayed and I said that. I said, God, this is it. This is like last chance. Like, I'm either going to give you everything now and keep going to church, or I'm going to leave and not go to church anymore. It's up to you. You've got to show up. And I didn't expect...
That's brave. That was a brave thing to do.
Yeah, but I guess I didn't expect anything. Because I just thought if God was really real, he would have like stopped me feeling like this a long time ago. And he would have like answered my questions a long time ago. So I didn't. Then I just said, I love you. And I was like, this is weird. Like, I'm in this room full of like sound and noise, people singing and etc. And I heard these really clear words, I love you, like audibly. And I remember thinking like, someone must see I'm praying, like someone's playing a bit of a prank on me, like whispering. So I kind of looked around and everyone was still standing. And then I thought, well, I must be our youth leader. Like, he must have said it. Which, thinking about it, is a little bit weird for a youth leader just to whisper that in your ear. But then I remember, like, Jim, our youth leader, was Scottish, and it definitely wasn't a Scottish accent. And so I shut my eyes, like, God, was that you? And just in my mind, I could picture Jesus in front of me. And he kind of embraced me, like, almost in my thinking mind, I saw him just cuddling me. And I felt it, like that warm feeling of a hug. And so for me, that summer was the moment where I was like, wow, like I've never had an experience of God like that before. Like he's real. I've got to go all in for him. And then that kind of coincided with my decision to be baptized. I decided then and there that I'd be baptized, because I was like, right, I believe it now. And I had to make some really difficult choices. So one of them, for example, was I said to God, like, God, I can't go back to college. Like, I can't make this decision and go back to college. Like, they don't work, because I would just get pulled into the crowd. I would just want to do the drinking and the partying and the girlfriends. Like, I want to do all of that again. And God just said, like, trust me. And he made it really clear that I was going to have to, like, say no to stuff, like say no to going to parties, even though I really wanted to go. And you know, I was even going to have to say no to hanging around with certain friends that I knew were bad influences on me, you know, skiving college and stuff like that. And so I had to end friendships. I didn't like go in and be like, I'm not being friends with you anymore because God said so. It was more over like a period of time that happened. But yeah, and then I told my youth leader I wanted to get baptized, and it worked out that my birthday was on a Sunday, and it was actually my 18th birthday. So I was baptized on my 18th birthday with one of my best friends as well, which is cool.
Oh, I love it. That's awesome.
So yeah, so that was it for me. And I think that's the reality of like being a Christian, is you either go all in on it, or you're always going to live in that, like, have that inner turmoil, if that makes sense. You're always going to have that inner feeling of like, I want to know, like, I want to know which way to choose. Like, it's like we're constantly faced with two paths, and which one will we walk down? And we know eventually we've got to choose, but I don't know if everyone's like me, but I'm generally quite an indecisive person. So it took me a long time to decide which path to walk down. But, you know, it's the harder path, but it's the better path, is what I would say.
That's awesome. Love that. Cheers, dude. Well, we got another question from one of the young people. They've asked, how do you know if it's you thinking something or if it's God trying to tell you something?
Yeah, it's a tough one, I think, because especially like for that first time, and if you want to put yourself out there in a sense, and tell someone like, oh, God's told me this for you, or you want to stand up even in church maybe and say, I think God's given me a word, like that feels like a massive step. So I think for me, the biggest thing is spending time getting to know God. You know, I don't know if people have got like social media accounts and things like that. But one of the things that happened with Facebook when it first came out, I know Facebook isn't like the most popular social media app these days, but when it first came out, it was like the most popular. And people would do this thing where like you'd leave your Facebook logged in on a computer, or you'd leave it logged in on your phone, and people would type like, you know, funny statuses that weren't actually you.
You did that to me for most of my teenage years. In fact,
I had a memory come up the other day where Sam and another one of the youth, when I was the youth leader, called Eddie May, they both typed a Facebook status for me, basically saying, I love One Direction. I'm the biggest One Direction fan, something along those kind of lines. And for the people that know me, they would know that isn't something that I would say.
Yeah.
You know, and that's like, so that's the key for me. It's like getting to know God so you know the kind of thing he would say. So the best way that you can know if it's God saying something to you or just your mind is like, is by getting to know him. And actually sometimes those things aren't mutually exclusive, which means they're not like completely separate. You know, sometimes you can say something that's really kind to someone that is actually like full of God. So for example, I think telling someone that you love them or that you believe in them or that you're for them, you know, that might not be directly words from God, that's words from you, but God's kind of got like behind those words, and it advances God's kingdom when you say those types of things. So that'd be my first tip, like get to know God. The second would be like ask someone to help you. Like if you know another one of the young people that, for example, often shares in youth group how God spoke to them, like ask them, how do they know? You know, there's a story of a guy called Samuel in the Bible. He's actually a boy, and he hears someone call his name, Samuel. And so he gets up and he goes to like someone in the house, this guy called Eli who lives in the house. And he says, Eli, you called me. And he goes, no, I didn't. Go back to bed, you silly boy. And he goes back to bed. Same thing happens. Samuel gets up. Yes, Eli, you called me. No, I didn't. Go back to bed. Third time happens. And then Eli clocks. It's God calling you. Go back. And Samuel didn't know that was God, and he needed someone else to help him work that out. So I would say to you, like, get someone kind of that maybe hears from God, and ask them to help you. And there are some good books and stuff out there as well. There's one called Hearing God from a guy called Nathan Finocchio. It's good. There's stuff like that. And then the other thing I'd say is the Bible. Like, that's the best way to get to know God, for one. And then two, God will never say anything that kind of contradicts the Bible. So, if you feel like God's giving you something really wacky and really weird, then maybe kind of see if there's anything in the Bible that aligns with that makes sense of that. And if not, just write it down and keep praying about it and saying, God, is this it? And I think if God really wants you to share it, he'll keep giving you that same picture or that same word, that same thing. He'll keep repeating it until you're obedient. So they're like the three things. I guess there's more I could say, but I think they're the most important ones.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cheers, man. Yeah, that's really helpful. The last question that was in is one that kind of relates to the season that we're in right now. It says, why does God not just get rid of coronavirus? That's kind of a big question, really, about about kind of the bad things that happen. Obviously, the year that we've had, but maybe just sort of just give us a little bit of kind of insight into that kind of area.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'd say was that there's no reason why God still couldn't do that. And I would encourage you to be praying for that. I think it's a good thing to pray. And even if it's, just that you're praying for protection for you and your friends and your family, and those that you care about, then that's okay, to pray in that way and to pray that kind of protection. I think the second thing I'd say is the kind of common answer for whenever stuff happens that we don't want is free will. And I know that sounds a little bit of a cop-out sometimes, but I think God has created humans with this human will, with this free will, and there's this extent to which he lets humanity and stuff play out. Not that he's separate from it, but he allows that. And we don't fully understand it sometimes, but God won't always intervene and show his hand necessarily. There was a story, I think, early on in the year when someone coughed in a lady's face and she got coronavirus. So, that's not God, not removing it. That was someone doing something that was really unkind and really evil, actually, and coughing in their face. So sometimes it's just that element. And then the other thing I think I'd say is that we could say that for so many illnesses, couldn't we? And so many situations, why doesn't God stop war? Why doesn't God stop poverty? Why doesn't God stop coronavirus? And I think a lot of the times we can answer that with, well, he's given us the capacity to stop these things. So even the ability that people have to have a scientific mind and come up with vaccines and stuff, we could put down to a creativity that God has given them. But I think it's a question that people have asked throughout history. You look at some of the Psalms, for example, and a guy called David often writes, and says God, why are you letting this happen to me? Those types of questions. And in the New Testament, the Christians were being persecuted, they were being killed because they were Christians, and they were having a really tough time of it. And quite a lot of the letters that were written in the New Testament were written because the guys who wrote those letters heard about the Christian suffering and wanted to encourage them to say, come on, keep going, you can do it, God is good, God is for you. And one of those letters is actually the book of Revelation, which is often a book that we're quite scared to read because it's a bit weird and wacky and we don't have a clue what's going on. But as a bit of a summary for what's going on, John writes to all these churches that are struggling. And what is happening is those churches are either giving up being Christians because it's too hard, or they're being killed for being Christians because they're sticking at it. There's those two things that's happening. And so John writes this letter to them, and God gives him this image, which is basically Jesus giving John this zoomed out view. I don't know if you've ever done that on Google Maps, when you zoom out to just try and get an overview, to try and understand where things are in the world. And it's almost on human history, Jesus helps John zoom out to see what's really going on. Because sometimes when we're suffering or we're struggling or we're in our hardships, it seems that's all that matters, or that's all that we can see, all that we can focus on, when actually there's so much more going on in the world. So, for example, during coronavirus, actually some amazingly good things have come out because of it. Think of the way that people all rallied around to help and get shopping to their neighbours, and the way people have even got to know their neighbours, different stuff like that. You think of, the food stuff that someone like Marcus Rashford has, been fighting for, all those types of things that are getting almost brought to the forefront because of the virus. So there is some good, but ultimately in Revelation, it zooms out and says God wins the day. So don't worry. And I think as Christians, this is one of the hardest things, because the answer really that I think God would sometimes give us is silence to why don't you take coronavirus away? Or it just be something like, actually at the end, I win, so don't worry. And that could be like, but I'm struggling right now, or this 2020 is rubbish, like right now. I don't really care about like the end of time. Like I want to know about 2020. When's it going to get better? But God says, just trust me. Just trust me. And actually, there's an experience in there in the Bible with Jesus where he has that, where Jesus is praying before he gets crucified, before he gets arrested. And he says, God, if you can you take this suffering, take this cup, which means like this suffering that I'm about to go through, this death I'm about to go through. If it's possible, will you take it from me? And God doesn't say yes or not. And then he says, no, but if not, your will be done. And he kind of submits himself to what God wants to take place. And I think that's what we need to do sometimes. Is it's okay for us to go, God, will you get rid of this? But if you don't, I trust you anyway. But there's the Old Testament story too in there. The three guys that get thrown into the fire, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. I caught some mice in my shed the other week, and I named them those three names because there's three of them. It's like they're about to get thrown into the fire, and they say like, we believe that our God can save us from this fire, but even if he doesn't, he's still our God. And like the question earlier was about how we can like know if we want to be fully devoted and when we want to be baptized. I think that's like the place we've got to get to, where we can say like, no matter what happens to me, my God is God. And if he takes coronavirus away, I know he can do that. But if he doesn't, he's still God. I still trust him, and I still know he's going to win the day at the end. And life might be hard and it might be tough, but he's with me every step of the way, and I trust him. And that's the challenge for us.
So good. Cheers, man. Just before we end, there's going to be one more thing after, but I just thought I'd ask a couple of the young people I know recently. A couple of our kind of newer young people have been picking up their Bibles for the first time and looking in their Bibles. Just quickly, what would you kind of recommend for them, just as like a really great place to start with reading their Bible? Because we know that there's been a couple of them. They're maybe a little bit confused as to what to read. So what would you recommend being a good place to start?
I mean, I'd say like whatever you find you can read, like at that time, like read that. And what I mean by that is I could recommend a book to you right now and you could start reading it. Say, for example, I don't know, the Gospel of Mark, but you could find it like really not very exciting or not relevant. And then you feel like you're a failure. But I'd say like if you started reading one book of the Bible and you're struggling with it, just start reading something else and see if you can relate to that. I would always encourage you to persevere as well. Like if you're able, if you're struggling with something, like keep reading and ask questions of it too, would be my other advice. So read something, like read a whole chapter of say Mark's Gospel, read Mark chapter 1, and then like have a little journal by you and write and say what stood out to you, like what happened in that. Jesus healed someone, Jesus said this, and start writing notes. And then if you've got any questions like what does that mean? What does this word mean? Like write those questions down too. And then a good question I think to ask when you read the Bible too is so what? Like, so what? What does this mean for me? Like, how do I live this out? It might be you read a story of Jesus healing for someone, for example, and the so what is Jesus is a healer. So I know that I could pray either for healing for myself or for healing for someone else. So I think, that would be my top tip is like persevere. Just make sure you read something, like stick at it. I think especially when you're young, I think as you start getting, maybe after a month of doing that, then stick with a book, be like as disciplined as you can. But the first thing, if you're struggling to read your Bible, is just to get into it, get into the habit of reading it, first of all, and then become disciplined in sticking with a book and sticking with stuff. And then make notes and ask, so what? Would be my top tips.
Awesome. Cheers, man. That'll be really helpful for them. Right, there's just one more thing. We're going to ask each guest every week on each episode just to leave us, to close with a kind of inspirational quote, something that you find inspiring or something that you think would inspire us. So what would, have you got anything that you could share with us?
Yeah, well, I guess a quote that I quite often share with the adults in church, and people are probably fed up with me saying it, I don't know, but I read a book by a guy called Jeff Lucas a few years back, and it was talking about Samson, and it had this quote in it. It was like put in bold in like the middle of this page, and then had like loads of gaps around it, so it was like really stood out. And it said, "In truth, what we really believe, we live by." And I think, bearing in mind what I'd said earlier, like about like knowing I believed in God, but wanting to live like a different way, the two just didn't match, and I had that tension in me. Like that quote really spoke to me when I read that book, and I actually took a picture of it and then put the picture on my wall next to my bed so that I see it regularly. Like, if we really believe Jesus is who he said he is, it should affect the way that we live. And we shouldn't feel guilty the times when it doesn't. We shouldn't feel like condemned and really bad, and like, because I think too many people feel like they're rubbish Christians when all they're doing really is trying their best. So don't feel guilty about it. But I think we should be challenged to try and actually live out what we believe. Like, if we believe Jesus is good and God and, all those things, then we should actually try and live that to the best that we can and give him our time, our money, our energy, all those things. So yeah, I'd encourage you to do that. And a bit of Bible to back that up, Matthew 6:33, about seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Seek God first. If you really believe in God, live it out. Seek him first.
Awesome. Cheers, man. That's great. Thank you. I really appreciate you being a part of the first episode today. Thanks for your time.
I hope it's helpful.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I'm sure it will be. For young people watching at home, obviously follow our social media links. You guys can get involved in these videos. You guys can ask your questions. So if you follow us on Instagram or Facebook, it'll give you an opportunity just to ask questions for future episodes. There's going to be 3 more, one a week, about different topics, different subjects. There's going to be a different guest each week. So I encourage you just to think of questions around those subjects and just ask them. And it'll be great to discuss those things. But cheers, Dave. Thank you. And guys watching at home, catch you later. Bye.